Malcolm, thank you so much for being here. I want to go ahead and jump right in because I know we don't have a lot of time together. President Donald Trump just moments ago held a press briefing where he announced that he is going to seize control of the DC police as well as deploy more than 800 National Guard troops to patrol the streets of Washington, D.C. to solve what he says is a crime issue, even though data suggests that that might not necessarily be the case. Uh, is this what DC needs? What is your immediate reaction?
DC needs in this moment, what DC needs is two senators and to have the recognition as a state that they've deserved for a long time. So that's what DC needs, two senators and representation in Congress. What DC needs right now is the $1 billion back that Republicans in Congress, along with Trump, stole from them that go to the very types of services that we need to be providing for the residents of the District of Columbia. What DC needs is to not have an administration that spends every single day, trying to pit people against each other and trying to demonize and weaponize the levers of government against the American people that they are supposed to be serving. So there's a lot that DC needs. DC does not need this federalization of the police, does not need mass troops on the streets of DC. And it's so frustrating when you think about it because everything he's saying is a bold-faced lie. Crime in DC is down, 30-year low, not Malcolm's opinion. But this is what the Department of Justice has said. And so you're seeing an administration that wants to distract from the fact that prices are going up on everything that people need to buy and afford in their life. It's trying to distract from the fact that Donald Trump is in the Epstein files and is refusing to release all of the details about his close personal relationship and friendship with an adjudicated pedophile. And he's trying to distract from the fact that this is the most incompetent and equally corrupt administration in American history.
You know, we saw today during the press conference that Donald Trump was, side by side with Pam Bondi, Janine Pirro, Pete Hegseth, Kash Patel. What we didn't see was Scott Turner, the Secretary of Housing and Urban Development, whose responsibility it actually would be to respond to what Trump is blaming the supposed high crime rate on, which is homelessness. Homelessness in America is a real crisis. So, two questions. What is your take on why HUD is not a part of this conversation? And two, what can how can Democrats respond to the housing crisis? And do you think that Democrats are doing a good enough job at tackling that issue?
So this is the second time that Trump has put somebody in a secretary of HUD who has no damn clue what is going on and who has no interest in building out the type of affordable housing that we need all across this country. As it relates to affordable housing, hear me on this. We need to build, baby, build. We need to be building affordable housing and getting all of the barriers out of the way that make that difficult to do across this country, including in DC. We know that housing affordability is the driving it's the driving aspect when you talk about poverty. When you talk about poverty, there's this whole belief, and I certainly ascribe to it, of the housing first model, that if you want to deal with deep poverty, which I've called the moral and economic issue of our time, it starts with giving people a stable, safe place to live. Then you can get people access to a good family sustaining job. Then you can get people the types of services that they need from a healthcare and mental health perspective. Then you can get people in a position where their kids can get the type of routine and access to hopefully a good fully funded public school in their neighborhood. But you have to have housing as the cornerstone of their lives. And right now, housing is out of reach for so many Americans. And this past budget has made all of that worse. This budget that the Trump administration pushed through with support of every Republican member of Congress took a sledgehammer to HUD. and is going to make it more likely, not less likely, that we have more and more people who find themselves homeless or find themselves housing insecure in the coming years. And so everything that this administration is saying they're trying to solve for, they're actually making worse. You know, you've heard me say this. I think the Democratic Party has a 3-word mission and ultimately a 3-word message. Our job is to make life better for people. This administration has spent every single day making life worse for the American people and federalizing troops and sending in masked cops all across DC is about creating a spectacle, about engaging in distraction. It's not about solving any of the problems that people actually want to solve for. And if Democrats get the opportunity to have power in Washington in 26, to take back the White House in 28, to get back power on the local level in races that are up and down the ballot, including in states like New Jersey and Virginia. If given that great trust, we have to be aggressive at making life better for working people and working families. These folks wake up every single day and say, we don't give a damn about the law. We don't give a damn about norms. All we care about is making life miserable for working families across this country. That's all they fucking care about. Democrats have to wake up every single day saying all we care about is making life better for working people and working families. And we're not going to nibble around the edges. We're going to go in and ask for the things that we need, that we know are going to make life better for folks. Investing in HUD at significant levels are one of the things that we need in this moment. Giving more flexibility to folks who want to build more affordable housing, talking about changes in terms of zoning at the local level, those are things that we need to do. So there's a lot that we can do, that we must do in this moment, looking at proposals that, give people, that freeze the rent. These are all the types of proposals that we know can make a real difference if we had people in government who actually gave a damn about doing that. This administration does not care about any of the things he stood at that podium and rambled about. They don't care about any of those things. This is about distracting from Trump having a close personal friendship with an adjudicated pedophile, and about this administration being the most incompetent in American history.
I heard you mention a rent freeze there, which has become a very contentious topic of conversation, as it's one of Zohran Mamdani, the mayoral candidate here in New York City. It's one of his main priorities. And, it's actually not a huge departure from what's happened in the past. Mayor Bill de Blasio also did a rent freeze, but suddenly it's become this like socialist, communist, woke agenda. I know that in 2026, the DNC is meant to support candidates. It's not meant to specify everyone's campaign or policy or agendas. But should Democrats get on the same page about what the solution to housing is?
Listen, communities are so different. I'm in Pennsylvania, right? And driving from Philadelphia to Erie County, for example, if you drive that diagonal of the state, you're going to go through communities that are urban, rural, suburban, exurban, and some of them remote communities. And so there is not a one size fits all solution to this. A part of what we know we need to do is to have changes as it relates to zoning, to allow for more density in areas where there wasn't density, to make it easier for people who want to build affordable housing to do so. We know that we need a federal government that is taking money out of HUD, and that creates a tax credit landscape where building affordable housing is something that is doable for the developers who engage in that work. And I'll tell you, there are a lot of great developers who I know who all they do is affordable housing, who want to do this work, and they are finding it more difficult than ever to do because every single day there's something changing with this federal government, and not changing in a smart strategic way, but they have to read the president's tweets like everybody else to understand what the hell he's going to do today and what the approach the administration is going to take on any number of issues. As it relates more broadly, the Democratic Party needs to be united, but unity doesn't mean uniformity. People in our
Mm.
party don't, let me say it this way. There is not one person who has a lock on all the good ideas. And we need to embrace the fact that we have a party of people who come from a variety of different lived experiences, professional experiences, who are bringing dynamic conversations into this primary process. And I think that what we need to do is to make sure that we have robust primaries. Okay, you've heard me say this, but the DNC's job is not to be a fucking incumbent protection racket. My job is not to protect incumbents. My job is to elect Democratic nominees. And what that means is that we have robust primaries where folks go out to their neighbors and make a case for their vision for their communities. And then we let voters decide who they want to be their mayor, who they want to be their member of Congress, who they want to be their president. And then the Democratic Party builds out the infrastructure for those candidates to go and win in November. That is our job, to make sure we win in November. And so it has been our commitment at the DNC to do everything we can to make sure Zohran Mamdani is the next mayor of the city of New York. And, you know, folks like Andrew Cuomo, who can't take no for an answer, needs to get a life, honestly, like get a life.
I really appreciate that perspective, especially coming from you. I know a lot of people, for some reason, they want to hear more from the DNC about supporting candidates like Zoran. People want to know that the DNC will support the choice of voters. And I think that that message is getting muddied out in mainstream media. I don't think that it's being put out there enough. And I know that you've been saying it. So thank you for reiterating that. Malcolm, thank you so much for your time. I really, really appreciate it.
No, thank you. Thank you for everything that you do. And I mean this genuinely, and hear me on this. The platform that you're building and the way in which you're helping people understand what this government is doing in all of our names is so important, because as crazy and chaotic as everything is right now, people should not be confused about what's happening. The corruption that we are seeing, the abuse of power that we are seeing is about filling the pockets of the people who are in these cabinet positions, about filling the pockets of these people who are members of Congress, and certainly about filling the pockets of the guy who is currently president of the United States. The corruption, the chaos, the division that they are doing across our government, across this country, in the states like Texas, where they're trying to undermine the will of voters with their scheme around redistricting, all of it is about consolidating power so that they can engage in a type of rank corruption that fills the pockets of the people who fund their campaigns. And then these folks leave office, and then they get cushy jobs with the very people that they have spent 2 or 6 years or 4 years, depending on the elected office and the term of office, that they've spent that time working for. They don't work for us. These Republicans that we're seeing, they don't work for us. They work for the corporations that fund them. And they do not care how many of the American people get hurt in the meantime. They are going to do everything they can to have us fighting with each other so that they can pick our pockets for the corporate overlords who own them.
I agree. And I'm glad we have you to help get the message out there.
We'll keep doing it. Well, thank you, my
Thank
friend.
you.
I'll talk to you soon.
All right. Today, President Trump announced that he will be taking over Washington, D.C. police, as well as deploying 800 National Guardsmen to patrol the city and protect it from violent crime.
Under the authorities vested in me as the President of the United States, I'm officially invoking Section 740 of the District of Columbia Home Rule Act. You know what that is? And placing the D.C. Metropolitan Police Department under direct federal control. In addition, I'm deploying the National Guard to help reestablish law, order, and public safety. You don't want to get mugged and raped and shot and killed.
The president's claims are antithetical to social scientists and the Department of Justice, who have all said that crime is down in Washington, D.C., sometimes between 30 and 35%, depending on the study. So to discuss this more with me, I am joined now by my panel. I'm joined by journalist Afeef Nessouli, lawyer and host of the Katie Phang Show on the Midas Touch Network, Katie Phang, and White House correspondent and managing editor of politics at The Griot, Gerren Gaynor. Hey everyone, thank you for joining me. So question first for Katie. Katie, can you briefly explain for the audience, if you can, sort of how Trump can do this?
The if you can part kind of threw me for a loop, because I guess it's the appropriate thing to preface all questions in Trump administration, whether or not you're allowed to do this or not. As my friend Congresswoman Sydney Kamlager-Dove says, is this shit legal? So the answer is yes, it's legal, but I'm not quite sure what alternate universe convicted felon Donald Trump is living in. I don't know what crime-ridden, violent, rioting, insane city he's referencing. I was just in DC a couple of weeks ago. I see people right now that are posting from social media that are showing that DC is fine. There is this idea that because there's a particular section of the Home Act rule of DC that allows the president to temporarily, and I want to emphasize temporarily, take over the Metropolitan PD, that Trump seems to think that this is now the appropriate thing to do. The other kind of interesting legal wrinkle quickly is that the National Guard, which is typically under the control of a governor, we saw that in California in June when Donald Trump sent National Guard over to California, to LA. And now there's a whole trial that is taking place concerning whether or not Trump violated the Posse Comitatus Act, which is this idea that you cannot use federal troops to be able to do civilian law enforcement. Interestingly, in DC, Donald Trump actually controls the National Guard there. So that's a kind of a very unique thing about DC. And so to the extent it's kosher what he's doing, sure. But is he supposed to be doing it? Nah. And is he doing it to distract from the Epstein files? Yes.
Right. Okay. That was the question I was going to get to. I'm curious, living in New York City and living around New York City, sometimes I'm not in the city. I'm used to sometimes seeing troops in places, sometimes depending on like if there's a UN summit or something. If you go to like Penn Station, you'll see that there are like some troops here. But I've heard from people who are like, are we supposed to feel safer when we see troops walking down the streets? Like usually in countries where that's happening, you don't feel like everything is okay and secure. So I'm like, I don't imagine that people will feel safer because they see a bunch of National Guardsmen walking around the streets.
Well, and listen, I'm sorry. That was
no, go
sorry.
ahead. Yeah,
I was just quickly going to say operational control of the Metropolitan Police Department has now been given to the Attorney General Pam Bondi. So it's not just the supplement to your point of maybe additional military presence. It's now the actual Metropolitan Police Department has been taken over by the Trump administration. And that, I think, is a very important distinction than maybe when we're in a major metropolitan city and we see the presence of military.
Well, I was just going to say that, like, it feels to me like we're watching Trump. I mean, honestly, like all of that is really clarifying because it makes me realize like what is possible in the like mechanisms of like sort of the mechanisms where he can control what is legal on its face, but like is actually just fascist tendencies and like where it leads us sort of like. It's like crime rates are what at a like 30-year low. I don't think he like suddenly thinks crime is spiking. Like there has to be some, deeper like sort of I can't speak to what it is, but it's like for me, like my expertise is Gaza. Like I was in Gaza. I'm a journalist, but I was an aid worker there, and I think that it's like the same thing as when they call like the journalists they kill like Hamas, right? Like they're literally creating a problem and then solving it with like violent like machinery and police and like this economy around like all of these actions that slowly erode the idea that like it would be weird to be over policed, and then you just suddenly have a new reality. And so I'm just watching this thing that we have in DC happening, and it's like it's a major step, but it's like one step forward and like a litany of steps towards like a new reality.
And so what I mentioned before and what Katie mentioned and Afeef just mentioned is that crime rates statistically are down. And he mentioned during his press briefing today, he mentioned other cities like Chicago, and he mentioned Baltimore. And Baltimore 3 weeks ago was like being praised for the way that they have responded and been able to lower crime rates. So I have a question for Gerren. In the press briefing room, I know that there wasn't a lot of time for questions. It seemed like Trump was really picking on like 3 people, but I didn't hear anyone push back on his claims of like everyone is apparently being murdered in Washington, D.C. So why do you think that the press is pushing back enough?
No, I think that today was a really missed opportunity for the White House press corps to really challenge the president, not just on what the data says about crime in DC and it being down, but also just the the questioning of why now. I think that there was opportunity to get more information from the president. Obviously, when we have these kinds of press conferences amongst reporters, it's exciting because you get to ask the president directly a question as opposed to a spokesperson. But as you can see, most of the questions were about foreign policy and not about DC crime per se. There were maybe 2 questions that I can remember that were really about why we were there. We all knew why we would be coming to this press conference, so we had opportunity to look up the facts ourselves before the press conference beforehand. And so I thought it was a missed opportunity. I wasn't surprised though. Typically when Trump has a press conference that's tailored for one particular subject matter, everyone kind of just throws questions from all over the place. I thought it was an opportunity to really center DC. I live in DC. It's a predominantly Black and brown city. I spoke to activists here in DC reacting to the president's executive action, and they're worried about what this means for residents. Obviously, crime happens in every city, especially in major cities, but they feel like, one, this is the issue of statehood. Like this is taking away DC's local right to govern itself. They're worried about the Black and brown youth of DC who could be not just physically harmed by law enforcement, given what's now taking place or will take place, but the psychological impact of seeing troops on the ground in your city. As a resident, I will say, do I worry about my safety at times? Maybe, perhaps. But most times when I'm outside, I feel safe in DC. I'm mindful. I'm from New York City, so I'm pretty like street smart. So I know, certain times of the night, maybe you don't go out. We do pay attention to where the crime is happening, so you might avoid certain areas of the city. But by no stretch of the imagination is there a crisis happening in DC, and reporters had an opportunity to challenge the president on that notion alone, and no one challenged him. The ones who were called on by the president. Obviously, if I had the opportunity and got called on, I would have certainly asked a series of questions about that. And he did not, include Mayor Bowser, and it seems like he kind of just went on a whim. And I feel like this is a theme that happens where once the president has something on his mind, he wants to do something, he does it, and then everyone falls in line. And it's not necessarily tied to facts. It's really, and it also is probably tied to the Doge employee who was assaulted a few days ago, and it just seems like it's reactionary, but not really based on facts.
Kevin, really quickly,
Yeah,
because I really like what
Yeah.
he just said, which is what Gerren just said, which is there's a fictionalized legal fiction that happens with Trump. He declares emergencies. So he declared a state of emergency by way of his executive order today to justify utilizing this particular section of the Home Rule Act of DC, because he's taking away these law enforcement resources for, quote, federal purposes. And he put in the executive order to protect federal buildings and to be able to allow an orderly functioning of our government. And yet there's zero evidence and zero facts and zero truth that substantiate this idea that we have a state of emergency. He used the same thing to invoke the Alien Enemies Act, to be able to kidnap people off the streets in the United States, to be able to get them off of U.S. soil with no due process. We're seeing the same thing happen here in Florida by Ron DeSantis declaring a state of emergency to be able to do a concentration camp called Alligator Alcatraz. And so I like that Gerren was pointing out the hypocrisy really from the media, which is, and then listen, I know they rigged this whole thing where they're only calling on certain people to ask these questions. But when you create these serialized, fictionalized states of emergency to be able to justify it, then it falls on the lawyers to have to challenge it, to go to court and say, where is your proof? But it shouldn't have to get to that point. It really should be immediate in the moment. But because Pam Bondi, Kash Patel, Pete Hegseth, Jeanine Pirro, they all stood next to him and nobody challenged him. That's why we have what we have right now in DC going down.
Yeah.
And it's also worth noting that the president had an opportunity to deploy the National Guard on January 6th, and he did not do that. And at that time, crime was higher in the city versus now is a 30-year low in DC. So if he really cared about crime in DC, he would have addressed that in his first term.
I've heard people question what constitutes a state of emergency, like, because Donald Trump's entire second term so far has been nothing but emergencies at the border, emergencies on electricity, emergencies with immigrants, like emergencies in DC. It's a lot. One thing in particular, or one person in particular, I should say, that was missing in action today during the press conference, which I don't think I've seen anyone talk about, is the fact that we keep talking about housing and we keep talking about all these people who are living on the streets who are apparently criminals and don't have any right to Washington, D.C., because Donald Trump says that he wants to take his capital back, as if the capital doesn't belong to all of us. Scott Turner, the Secretary of Housing and Urban Development, who you would assume would be working on housing solutions, was nowhere to be seen, yet we had Kash Patel up there. So just question for the room, what do you make of the fact that the person who's supposed to be solving housing is not talking about homelessness?
Yeah, I'm not sure. I will say that, as someone who covers, I work for a Black media news outlet, and, it's not lost on me that Scott Turner is the only Black member of the cabinet. And he has yet to be really centered by the Trump administration. He's sort of in the background. Whenever you do see him, he's like giving prayers at, cabinet meetings and White House events. But he hasn't really been centered by the president. And I think it's because that's not really a priority for the president. He talks about homelessness as if he cares about it, but he's addressing homelessness as a criminal issue when it's really a economic, social issue. And that is, from what we've seen from the Trump administration, is not really a major feature of their interests.
I've heard from people who work in DC and who have been around the White House who have said that President Trump's issue with homeless people is actually a really serious one, where like if he drives through DC in the motorcade, he expresses disgust and like disdain for seeing homeless people out on the street. So I'm not at all surprised that this is his approach.
You have to follow the money. Like, I was a reporter at the Wall Street Journal, and I was sent to East Oakland for a homeless encampment reporting job. And I met a woman who was 60 plus, I think, at the time, and she had 2 jobs. She couldn't literally afford to find an apartment. So she was in an encampment called Wood Street. And the thing is that I keep thinking about is, what is the financial incentives of like criminalizing homelessness rather than like sort of solving it? And it's the same kind of thing as, I know I keep going back to Gaza, but it's like the military industrial complex, like that kind of concept is what we're watching Trump sort of elevate and make bigger and harder. And I don't think that the housing crisis sort of falls into that, but to criminalize the unhoused in the country. And sort of, so you're getting this situation where, and this is probably too like sort of philosophical, but it's really, to me, it is about following the money, and why the incentive to criminalize is just higher than it is to solve something like the incredible homelessness crisis that is honestly easily addressed if other decisions are sort of made economically.
It was announced yesterday that every member of the Aljazeera team that was in Gaza is now dead after a group of journalists were killed in a targeted strike yesterday. Do you guys all, in your individual opinions, do you believe that the world is responding adequately or appropriately to this attack on the press in Gaza?
No.
Afeef?
Resounding no. I mean, we haven't been responding correctly to this situation between, just the genocide in general. So like there's been like over 200 journalists killed since October 7th. So I was in Gaza from March 27th to June 3rd as an aid worker, but I was also a journalist for The Intercept, and that was this year. And honestly, like, I knew journalists who knew Enes Sharif, and also Mohammed Kreika was a very dear friend of mine's family member. Like, these people are just regular people. They're not with Hamas. And this kind of misinformation is the type that we see also being deployed against us, which is that like you're creating an emergency crisis and you're basically just targeting a tent of journalists that just had cameras. Like, they had cameras and they were there reporting what was going on in Shifa and like whatever hospitals. I remember because I was there. I was in Gaza City and I know where they were. And And it's really the point here that I want to make is that they're literally silencing voices using mechanisms that I think will eventually just be used on us. And I think that they're investing in drones. Listen, I was there. It was loud all of the time. There were bombs all of the time. Like, it wasn't just some of the time. It was literally 24/7. And I think it's important to note that, like, that's an investment. That's a lot of money going into a really, really robust structure of control. And I think, like, as we see these other topics that we're talking about, it's like really important to understand that these robust structures that are terrifying in real life are really happening somewhere in the world. And I don't know, it's like, to me, these journalists being killed are the tragedy is that they were vibrant, good people who literally did a great job trying to cover a terrible thing happening to their people, and killing them is just one of the most horrific things in the world in a list of a bajillion things that have happened to real people that are horrific. So, I mean, I'm extremely emotional about it because I know people who know them.
Yeah, I also wonder, so many people in Gaza have been forced to become storytellers, forced to go online and talk about what they're experiencing and what's happening. So I wonder what is the purpose of targeting these journalists when you're already keeping journalists from other parts of the world out? You won't let journalists in, and everyone in Gaza who has the ability to is talking about what's happening to them. So why focus on this group of people when we've already seen so much? And I also wonder whether or not this is an indication that something worse is ahead of us.
You're eliminating to Afeef's point, you're eliminating and silencing the people that are supposed to be the quote independent component of this, right? Where you don't even already have access to the area, but then it's propaganda, because that is how you control the forward facing information. If you can't get it in an independent way, then you control the propaganda machine. And that propaganda machine is we will limit, if not allow any access to Gaza to be able to report credibly and accurately about what's going on. And anytime imagery is projected in some way, it's said to be a lie or manipulated. And so now when you target a journalist, it's the same thing that happens here in the United States, but it's worse. Obviously, that's what's happening in Gaza. It's you create a compromised fourth estate, or either you just destroy it. But at the end, then you totally control the narrative. And if you control the narrative, then who is there to fight back and say that that is not true? You're left with literally the people that are there, but even they have no resources. How are they supposed to be telling the world what is happening there when we're supposed to expect them to have Wi-Fi when they don't have food? It doesn't make any sense. And so but there was supposed to be a respect for journalists. There's supposed to be, in wartime, respect for journalists to be able to have some idea of their safety. And now we see that Israel doesn't care.
Gerren, I had a question for you. As someone who works for a publication, do you think that American publications or I guess at this point it's been so long that it's kind of pointless. But should American publications have been demanding that they allow journalists from the States into Gaza? Because we know that there's no one in there from around the world.
I think it's important for American news organizations to stand in solidarity with all journalists around the world, because if that can happen in Gaza, it can happen anywhere, and when we're silent, we are complicit. And I often complain about being a journalist in the US, but I could not imagine putting my life on the line for the truth. And most journalists in this country wouldn't even have the courage to do that kind of reporting. And I think it's important for all of us to use our voices however way we can use them.
All right. I'm going to bring it back to the States. I want to talk about MAGA's latest spin on the Epstein saga. Vice President J.D. Vance said in a Fox interview over the weekend that Democrats now are the ones who are involved in some sort of cover-up. He said that Democrats hid the Epstein files for years and that Trump is the one who is now demanding transparency. But just a few weeks ago, Donald Trump called the Epstein the whole Epstein case hoax. He also called it bullshit. So which is it? And do you guys think that MAGA loyalists, voters, are ever going to get tired of all of these spins? Because what is their final straw? I feel like a month ago, we were sure that this was it. This is what was going to turn MAGA against Donald Trump. And at this point, I think he won again. I think they're convinced that this is either not true, or if it is true, it's Biden's fault.
Well, I will say
Anyone
that
jump?
the whole notion that Democrats are trying to hide the files is I don't even know how we got there. I mean, it was Democrats in the House Oversight Committee that got a successful motion to release the files. They're the ones who have been kind of beating the drumbeat, along with some Republicans like Marjorie Taylor Greene, and whoever thought that we would see, a Jasmine Crockett and Marjorie Taylor Greene on the same side of an issue. And I think that speaks to how big of an issue it actually is. And I think that certainly President Trump is sort of maybe in the moment winning the information war. I think even the DC executive action today, one could argue that it was another stream of headlines to distract from this really big controversy that really bothers him. Like, he gets really upset when he's asked about Epstein. He curses. I think it's telling in his behavior when he's asked about Epstein that, he's really bothered by this issue. And I don't think it's going to go away. I think that, sure, the media will chase headline after headline, but I don't think that this is going to necessarily go away, especially once Democrats are back from recess. I think that they're going to really be beating this issue. Whether or not MAGA supporters will, sort of like give up on the issue, I'm not exactly sure. But it does seem like when you see, the Candace Owens of the world and Marjorie Taylor Greene, like, really not letting the issue go, I think it's going to be something that's going to kind of linger over the Trump administration until they provide more information. But I'm not sure if there's enough public pushback or pressure. Right now, the pressure is really coming from like elected officials and political voices. But does the average voter care? I'm not sure quite based on what I've been seeing.
We have an upcoming deadline for the production of documents pursuant to a congressional subpoena that was bipartisan. James Comer put his John Hancock on to be able to send over, right? So there are upcoming depositions that are supposed to be scheduled, mainly of Democrats, but still, there are things that are kind of just threshold moments in time that are on the immediate event horizon that become inescapable. Then you couple that with things like today's order from the Maxwell judge in federal court in New York, where he torched the Trump DOJ, stating that this whole head fake, as I've called it, of unsealing the grand jury records was done by the Trump DOJ in an effort to mislead. And that's actually the verb he said in his order, to mislead the American people. Now, look, is it because Trump wants to be able to blame a federal judge when the records aren't released? Sure. But there's a difference between the grand jury transcripts and the entirety of the Epstein files, which has been subpoenaed by a congressional oversight committee. So I think that there's this kind of trickle, drip of information moment that's happening here, where because we're getting nothing, we're not even getting like a little bit of information along the way. I think that people are becoming more and more fervently in desire and wanting of this. But to your point, Kevin, though, the goal keeps on getting pushed back and back, because you would think that this would be the bright line in the sand that you cannot cross, which is pedophilia. And yet we're seeing, the lionization of Ghislaine Maxwell, the uplifting of her still as some type of truth teller in all of this. And so I feel like, yes, it's great when you hear the skepticism from Marjorie Taylor Greene, Joe Rogan, and others that have this kind of, elevated status in MAGA land. But I think that we have to do what I call walk and chew gum at the same time energy, right? We have to talk about DC. We have to talk about Epstein. We have to talk about terrorists. We have to talk about Gaza. We have to talk about everything like you're doing, Kevin, day in and day out, because that's our responsibility. Because there's more of us than there are of them to be able to make sure that the truth continues to come out. And I feel like this Epstein thing, to Gerren's point, it's such an Achilles heel for Trump. He's so triggered by it that why wouldn't we bring it up anyway? Just to piss him off too.
But the thing is, you mentioned walking and chewing gum, and I totally agree. I feel like, it needs to consistently be brought up. My question is, I see in my comments all the time, and I always tell people that, like, you all follow me, so like you see, I post various different stories throughout the day. I post so often, but I really do pay attention to how people respond to the posts, and that dictates what I'm going to be posting about. But then I see some people who everything that's happened over the last 2 weeks, I see comments, people are like, they're trying to distract us from the files. So like, am I being naive where I think there's no way that Donald Trump is deploying 800 National Guards troops to DC to distract from files? Am I crazy?
It can be
I
both.
just
It can be all of
It
it.
could be crazy. Like, it could be happening. Who knows? We can't
Who
know in this
knows?
climate. It's so hard to know. That's half of the problem of being a journalist, is that you have to like start doing your own sort of like, we have to sort of collaborate together, because the actual structures that be are so in our way to knowing whether things like the Epstein files are as deep and sort of as damning as they could be, or if the thing that's happening right now is that there's literally hundreds of troops being deployed to DC to get us to not look at Gaza or something. Like that's where I'm literally at. It's like, what is the systemic thing we're watching fail over and over again?
Yeah, I'm just not sure. And when people are in my comments all day long being like, it's a cover up, I'm like, it can't be. Donald, I feel like there's just a line for like human beings in general where I'm like, no one is that crazy, but I don't control, the armed forces. So maybe if I had a bit more perspective. All right, I'm gonna move on to our last subject. I want to talk about Andrew Cuomo, who is it's really pathetic at this point. Andrew Cuomo looks like he's getting more and more desperate as he continues to attack Zohran Mamdani, the Democratic candidate for mayor in New York City. Cuomo is taking to Twitter to complain about Mamdani living in an apartment that only costs $2,300 a month. He said that Mamdani looks tired after his vacation. He said that he is tougher than Mamdani will ever be. But Cuomo is still behind in the polls, and I feel like no one is reminding him of this. Stats show that Mamdani is polling ahead of every other candidate combined. And Cuomo is the one, when he announced that he was going to run as an independent candidate, who said the person who's not polling well enough needs to drop out by September. So do you guys think that maybe he's reaching that deadline that he set for himself and he's realizing that, he might have to be the one who drops out?
Honestly, I don't know that Cuomo is that smart. I'm not sure. Like, literally what I think is actually happening is that Cuomo keeps showing everybody that he's just not as smart as Mamdani. And that is one of the basic sort of foundational reasons he's not as good of a candidate. He's just not as smart as Mamdani. He started attacking him for his apartment. He started attacking him about his looks. Mamdani's really energetic and is going out. It's really actually interesting how much he's changed the sort of political map in New York. And the thing is the way that he's attacking him is sort of assuming that everyone's forgetting that he's a multimillionaire who moved to New York a year ago, and his rent is $8,000 a month. There's just nothing that he can sort of win on. His attacks just they don't make him seem like a leader who really cares. He just doesn't seem like him or Harris care. And I think that the thing that Mamdani kind of shows a little bit, at least for me, is that he seems like he'll care for a while before, I don't know, maybe power corrupts, absolutely. But I think he cares. And I think that that's really not the highest bar, but here we are, in 2025, hoping our politicians even care about sort of policy or reading.
Okay, I do have a question for Gerren, because you are around President Trump so often. He is really dedicated to beating Zohran Mamdani, but we've heard that he has spoken to Andrew Cuomo privately, and unless I missed it, I don't think he has publicly come out and sort of endorsed Andrew Cuomo, which I think would be just the final nail in the coffin for Cuomo. But why is Trump, who already left New York City and who is constantly talking about how awful the city is, why is he so invested in the local politics of New York?
Well, one as a former New Yorker, I think Trump just generally has a fascination with New York, no matter what's going on in New York City, because he sort of was like outcasted by New York City, and I think that kind of low key hurts him. But I think that it really bothers not just Trump but the Republican Party that he's having such a surge in New York City. Most people did not know who he was before he ran for mayor. And, I'm no longer in New York, but my friends are really energized by his candidacy. And I don't think that the whole socialist, thing is like working anymore. I think that when you run a campaign, talking about affordability, which is like the number one issue for most Americans, but especially in New York, I mean, you can't compete with that. And I think for Cuomo, I don't know that it was wise to sort of attack Mamdani for paying $2,300 in rent. If that's too low, I think he called it like theft, because he makes $140,000. $140,000 in New York City, it does not take you far, and $2,300 is not cheap at all, So, but I think it also just speaks to what the 2024 election was really about for every American voter, and that was affordability. And on the national level, it appears that the Trump administration is not prioritizing that. The president has been very bullish on his tariff operation campaign, and it keeps reiterating without the facts supporting that these tariffs will benefit Americans and bring down costs. It's actually bringing up costs, and businesses are suffering, and they're laying people off, and they're raising prices because of it.
Tariffs, like I almost added tariffs to the show today, and I'm just so confused about where we are and what tariffs are on and what tariffs are off that I don't even want to try to talk about it. Like I can't keep up, and I think Trump is also confused.
yeah.
And so
some days it's a taco tariff. It's taco tariff day, right? It's like we don't really know if he's going to do it or not. But very quickly, Cuomo is establishment, and I think anybody who's an establishment candidate, either a Republican or Democrat, starting to feel nervous now. I think the New York primary and the New York race is just a very small kind of microcosm of the bigger universe of politics. But I think we have to pay attention, because I agree with what Gerren's saying. I think the whole socialist thing is not catching on as well as it should. And I think Cuomo's past his expiration date in many ways. But in this instance, it's because he knows that people are responding to authenticity. Cuomo is not an authentic person. He's traveling on the family dynasty name, but that dynasty has died hard. And I'm not talking good dynasty like 80s TV. I'm talking just like bad legacy name now. And so I feel like Cuomo understands that. So in some weird way, Cuomo has the political sensitivity to understand, but he has no political sensibility. And I saw someone post on social that whoever's running Cuomo's social account must secretly be supporting Mamdani because it is such a bad social.
And so you guys didn't get to see the interview that's before this, but I got to speak with DNC Vice Chair Malcolm Kenyatta, and he said that Cuomo needs to get a life. And I'm really excited to see Kenyatta and Ken Martin sort of very fervently say, we are here to support Zohran because he is a Democratic nominee. And I don't think that mainstream media is talking about the way that the DNC is supporting him enough.
Right.
Democrats in office, Democrats in elected office across the country may not be excited about Zohran because it may threaten them, but the DNC is supporting him. And I don't mean to say that to sound like a DNC spokesperson. I'm just reiterating. But I wonder, will Democrats? How will Democrats respond in the fall when he inevitably wins? Because we can only do this for so long. So where do you guys see that going? Like Zohran, I don't see a world where Zohran loses. So because we're already in August, and I was at what I thought was Afeef's private fundraiser for Zohran Mamdani this past weekend, and you guys could have rented out Madison Square Garden. It was really hard to breathe there. So like, Afeef, you and a bunch of other, local organizers had this fundraiser for Zohran, and the energy is so palpable. I don't see him losing. So how do you guys think that a Jeffries or a Booker will respond to this?
I agree with what everyone's saying here, which is about authenticity. And like, listen, like the way Cuomo's answering him is like his math about rent is like really, it's not good. Like it doesn't work. Like it's easy to like poke holes in it. And it's giving that he doesn't have the sort of capacity to meet Mamdani intellectually, I think. And also Mamdani it's easy for him to explain what he means. He's just like, this is one idea. Rent freezing has helped people in the past. And I think that it makes everyone excited. It also is one of those things that's going to have to be battle tested and figured out. And you can't just like be the type of Cuomo or Trump in this kind of, listen, they're in power, and obviously Trump is the president of the United States, but we're learning because of this in a backlashing way that like men who are narcissists who don't read are not good leaders. They are bad leaders. And it's important to like really like look at our leaders as just thinkers who will try to solve problems. Like we need to remember it's really basic. Like they don't have to be the richest people or the most powerfully connected. They just need to literally be smart enough to try to solve real problems that take, sometimes they take math and a lot of reading and a lot of like sort of looking at data.
Yeah. So we're about to, wrap this up. I kind of want to end this where we started, which isn't a good place, unfortunately. But if Mamdani wins in November, and with Donald Trump talking about, the way that he is going to respond to Zohran Mamdani, what do you guys sort of see happening if, let's say, Donald Trump decides to deploy the National Guard to, New York City, where Zohran Mamdani, he's new to this kind of elected office if he were to be in charge of New York City. How do you see that going? And do you think that it's a reality? Because I imagine
Trump will try it. He'll try it.
Yeah.
He's going to he talked about Chicago, Baltimore. He's pulled it off. He's tried to pull it off in LA. That's why that Posse Comitatus trial is really important that we're watching right now. That's happening in California to see what kind of precedent is being set, because I want to underscore that wrinkle that we talked about at the beginning, which was that the DC National Guard belongs pretty much federalized to Trump, right? And so that's a little bit of a wrinkle in DC specific. But I think Afeef hit it on the head. Mamdani has a brain. And I think intellectually, when you go toe to toe with people that have the intellectual ability and then they have the charisma to get people behind them, you have this, Gavin Newsom energy, et cetera. I feel like if this happens, and I think, Kevin, to your point, I think there's a very real possibility that Mamdani wins. Why? Because the same energy you're feeling for him is the energy you felt for Kamala Harris. And I think a lot of people saw what happened when they didn't go out and vote, or they didn't do the engagement they needed to in November of 2024, and where we find ourselves now with Donald Trump federalizing the DC police force to be able to go into a city under a bullshit excuse. So I think that you're going to see more and more local and state races with stronger candidates that are, quote, more progressive and, quote, more authentic, right? You're going to see that because that is the immediate pendulum swing back that we need in the United States right now, however we can get there. I fear for what happens. I think that we end up having a lot more political unrest. How that's defined is left to be seen. But I do think there's a reason why you've seen the No Kings protests the way they've been. The good trouble lives on days. I think that's why you're seeing the May Day coming up on September 1st for Labor Day. There is a very large, very organized form of dissent in the United States right now that's reacting to the Donald Trump administration. And I think as more and more of the somebody just posted on my Instagram that we're starting school. My fifth grader, my 10-year-old starting school in 2 days, 3 days. The price of basic stuff for her, including backpacks, is going up by 39%, courtesy of these tariffs. I mean, when people start feeling that pile-on energy, they're going to react and they're going to blame the appropriate person, and that's going to be the Republicans, and you're going to see a lot of pushback.
Well, I'll just add on Mamdani. Obviously, yes, the president will make him not just, he can deploy the National Guard, but I think he will Mamdani will end up being like the new, name that he references, like the same way he references Jasmine Crockett a lot in his speeches. It'll just become his new pinata, his new political pinata. But I think that a question will be, what if Mamdani is successful? Like, what if this so-called socialist is successful and is able to really make some real make some real success in New York and bring down the cost? That will be challenging for Republicans to respond to, because their arguments about so-called leftist policies, it will fall on his face. So I'm really interested to see how this all plays out. I think Mamdani is energized and ready to take on Trump if need be. And New York's a very different city compared to other cities around the country, and I think that it's going to be something to watch for sure.
All right. Well, thank you all so much for joining me. I really, really appreciate your time, and I will talk to you all later. Thank you all so much for tuning into this week's episode of Here's Why with Kevin Ortega-Rojas. I really appreciate your time. If you haven't already, make sure to subscribe to my YouTube channel. Make sure to follow me over on Instagram, and I will be back next week with an all new video. Until then, take care. Bye.